Thank you very much, Dr. Shu. You know, now we've heard from two doctors, one regarding humans and one regarding pets. Something occurred to me as I was thinking, if I had a family member who I thought may benefit from cannabis, where would I go? Like, what would I do? Where would I go to try to get either information or a product that could help them? Would I be able to talk to someone? Would I feel comfortable talking to anyone? One of the things that we're trying to do is close off and strangle the black market, the illegal growth of cannabis. We don't know, especially in that illegal market, what's being put into products that are being sold. So we require this legal market, we need this legal market to flourish so that we can have confidence in the products that are being developed. And that leads me to the next speaker, because one of the things that I learned as part of reading a little bit about what happened recently, because a lot of times of people that came to us were concerned about the illicit market, you know, people that are doing bad things. So I watched a little bit or heard a little bit about the trial of El Chapo, probably one of the largest, most renowned drug dealers in the world, right? And he was just prosecuted, convicted on all charges. But what he used to do, he would lace some of the drugs that he would sell with fentanyl. So forget about that for a second. You could be just producing some of these products and have things get into those products that could be damaging to the person or to the pets that are consuming them. How do you avoid that? By making sure that they're tested at an appropriate laboratory. Would you be surprised to hear that there's 2 testing laboratories in the city of Monrovia? I found that out recently from the mayor of the city of Monrovia. I did not know that. So for the next portion, cannabis laboratory testing, let's welcome Dr. Andrew Pham of Bell Costa Labs. Dr. Pham asked me, how are we doing on time? And I gotta tell you something. We're gonna do this until we're all done with the speakers. And we're gonna share this video with other cities and other elected officials and other residents so that they can get the benefit that we got today.
Thank you, Mayor, for that kind of introduction. I apologize, I don't actually have any slides prepared, so I invite you to gaze upon my handsome face as I speak. My name is Andrew Pham. I'm not actually a doctor. I have my master's degree in medical science from Boston University. I got my undergraduate degree in chemical biology from the University of California, Berkeley. I currently work at Alchemist Labs in Garden Grove, California. Before that, I was the scientific director at Bell Costa Labs. I was also the lead scientist at CB Sciences, a hemp-derived CBD company, as well as lead scientist at SC Laboratories, one of the earliest and first cannabis testing labs in California. So I've actually spent the entire time out of school in the cannabis industry, kind of chasing my passion. And really what it comes down to, the reason I'm here is because I really believe that cannabis has an unfair stigma. And I think it's natural for people to be afraid of something that they don't understand. And my hope is that by presenting things about cannabis from a scientific and factual perspective, by helping you understand it in that manner, hopefully you'll be a little less afraid of it. Yeah, cannabis testing is extremely important. So when the Adult Use Marijuana Act was passed in 2016, it established the Bureau for Cannabis Control in Sacramento. And one of the most significant parts of the regulations that were enacted was the mandatory need for laboratory testing for all products sold in California. And so there was a gradual phase-in. Anything produced at the beginning of this year from then on has to go through a full suite of nearly a dozen different scientific analyses. This ranges from potency testing, microbiological testing, pesticide testing, residual solvents, heavy metals, water activity, moisture, and the list goes on. This is not just for one part of the supply chain, it's for pretty much for every single type of product, from flowers to vape cartridges to distillates to infused edibles. And so the problem though is that there basically aren't enough testing labs in the state to fully support the regulatory framework right now. Last I checked, there are only about 32 licenses for labs. Only about half of them were actually operational. And in comparison, distribution licenses are between 2,000 and 3,000 in the state. So it provides a pretty remarkable business opportunity for anyone who wants to start a lab. But at the same time, it's kind of a mini public health crisis. Because if there aren't enough labs and all the products don't get tested, you can start introducing on the black market products that have some significant contamination and dangers that could present a public health risk. I want to start with by talking about potency testing, cannabinoid testing as it is. Basically, it's a way to find out how much THC or CBD or any other cannabinoid is within your product. So before regulation came in, potency testing was not required at all. And you should kind of imagine and think about how crazy that is. Imagine if the pharmaceutical industry just sold unlabeled bottles of pills that you had no idea how much of an active ingredient was in. It's pretty crazy. And so now that it's required, not only is the potency testing required for the product, but there are also label requirements that the label has to match the scientific analysis that was done within plus or minus 10%. So this makes things a lot safer because now you can have controlled doses of a cannabis product before it gets to the patient. So before this, you can't just tell how strong something is just by looking at it. You can have 10 milligrams, you can have 100 milligrams, you can have 1,000 milligrams, and the more it is, the kind of higher risk you have of a side effect. Basically, if you ate a brownie that had 1,000 milligrams, you didn't know about it, you'd lose a day of your life. You just pass out for 18 hours. And so one of the kind of public health issues that I'd like to address is this labeling requirement is really important for edibles. If I do notice that there are some people in the crowd that their principal goal is to protect children. One of the public health issues is keeping edibles away from children, and that was part of the regulatory framework. This was addressed in 3 different ways. One, the requirement for child-safe packaging, and I'll tell you that stuff really works because I'm 30 years old and I can barely get it open. 2, it requires a symbol that every infused product is marked clearly with a logo that has a little cannabis leaf, a triangle, and a CA on it, so you can tell that there's THC in it. And then finally, the labeling requirement that tells you how much THC is in it that matches the lab test. So if that's the rule and that's what people are following, I truly believe that's going to make things safer. Because if you don't have labels and you don't have a known amount, and you look at an edible product and you can't tell if there's any THC in it, how are you going to keep it away from your children? I just want you to think about that for a little while. So potency testing is extremely important because of how it goes into the labeling requirements. Another thing that's extremely important from a public health standpoint is pesticide testing. So the state of California is above and beyond for pesticide testing. They require that cannabis products be tested for 66 different pesticides, and action limits are as low as 100 parts per billion. In order to do this, it's extremely costly, complicated from a technical perspective, but it actually makes things safer than most of the vegetables you find in your grocery store. We've actually tested some different products from different industries, especially in cigarettes. And in the tobacco industry, it's riddled with some of the pesticides that we're required to test for. So things that are clean enough to sell as a tobacco product wouldn't be clean enough to sell as a cannabis product in the state of California. There's a particular pesticide that's commonly used in the cannabis industry called mycobutanil, or Eagle 20. When this is heated, it degrades chemically into a compound called hydrogen cyanide, and that's really, really bad for you. So this is one of the most commonly found pesticides in cannabis, and before regulations, we would pretty much find it in almost everything. Now that mycobutanil testing is required, we're seeing it in much, much fewer products. The state of California estimates that only less than 10% of products are actually failing for pesticides right now, which is a huge improvement from previous estimates, which were about 50 to 80%. So yeah, if you're into organics and stuff like that, the pesticide testing is just going to be extremely important in order to preserve public health. Another thing is microbiological testing. So there's a really common pathogenic fungus that you might even find in your bread if you leave it out. It's called Aspergillus. There are 4 different species of Aspergillus, and the state is requiring that cannabis products be tested for Aspergillus in inhalable products. And so the inherent danger with Aspergillus is that it produces something called a mycotoxin. There are 4 different types of aflatoxins as well as ochratoxin, and these are neurotoxic compounds that are left over from the spores when they degrade. So even though if you put a flame to it, it'll actually kill the organisms themselves, the toxic byproducts could still be left behind and ingested by the patient. And so this was actually something that happened a while back. There was an immunocompromised patient that was using medical cannabis via an inhalation route, and because their immune system was compromised and the lab testing wasn't mandated in that state, the patient ended up dying from exposure to this Aspergillus compound. So this is something that we really want to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past, and this is why lab testing is important. Another thing that's very recent and also just extremely important and topical is the introduction of heavy metal testing. So after December 31st of 2018, all cannabis products were required to have heavy metal testing for arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. Mercury, as we know, is found in a lot of fish, but it's not really that common in cannabis products. However, during my time at Bell Costa Labs, what we found is that a lot of the vapor cartridges on the market, the ones that are pre-filled with oil, are actually leaching out failing amounts of lead. The failure limit is about half a part per million. We're seeing as high as 1 to 2 parts per million in products that were basically about to be sold. And the reason for this, most people actually blame the fact that the cartridges themselves have metallic atomizers that are imported from China, and there are very loose heavy metal laws over abroad. And so because there's no quality control check when you purchase these cartridges in bulk and have them shipped over, it isn't until you get it here in the lab and have it tested that you realize, oh no, like my product itself is being contaminated with lead because of the atomizer we're using. And so this is very recent. It's only been required for the last couple of months, but it's causing a kind of a paradigm shift in the entire industry for the better. A lot of producers are actually now switching to ceramic elements, which wouldn't leach as much heavy metals, and a lot of people suspect that the acidic terpenoid compounds are the reason that the metals are breaking down and leaching into solution. Another thing I want to talk about is residual solvent testing. So earlier you heard about extraction processes. Extraction is basically how you get oil from flowers, and most people will use solvents in order to do that. Although a very common method is CO2 extraction, which is what we exhale. It's not exactly toxic. Another really common one is ethanol extraction and butane extraction. So there's a good chance that if not properly purged, you can have failing amounts of residual solvents like ethanol or butane in your product. And if that's the case, it won't be able to be sold in California. And so there are a lot of different reasons why lab testing is important. But in order to kind of, maximize public health and safety, we have to have more labs opening up, which is why I really believe that the city of Monty will really benefit from having more labs opening up, not only from public health for the state of California, but from an economic perspective. There is a very large demand for chemists and people working in the scientific STEM fields in the cannabis industry, specifically for the lab testing portion, because there's so much sophisticated technical difficulties that have to be overcome in order for this to be successful. Just the thought of testing for 66 different pesticides at 100 parts per billion for every type of cannabis product in California, it's not easy. In fact, it's never been done in the history of science. So there's a lot of collaboration among the labs to figure out how to do this. And in order to figure this out, we need good scientists. And so for the most part, that's all I had. So thank you very much.